Hello and welcome to another episode of Gender Stories. I know I'm always excited, but what can I say? I just get to meet the best people and I get to interview wonderful people that I know from other parts of my life. So today I am elated to introduce to you Marissa Stein, who is a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Washington, an ASIC certified sex therapist, and a nationally certified counselor. They're non-binary, neuroqueer, kinky and queer, pagan practitioner of magic who lives with chronic pain and disability. Given these lived experiences that felt the impact of intersectional marginalization. As a white person, Marissa does their best to be aware of their own privilege and biases as part of dominant Eurocentric descendant culture. They endeavor to do their best to do anti-oppression work that is trauma-aware and believe that every person deserves to enjoy their life free from shame and oppression. They strive for cultural humility and to be an accomplice in the continued fight against white supremacy wherever they can. Thank you so much for making the time to talk with me today. And you have a podcast that you're about to launch soon, right? Do you want to add what the podcast is called?
Yes, so it's going to launch soon. I'm waiting on getting the branding and production details finalized. It's called Not Fucking Normal because I'm not and I'm not gonna.
Yeah. And I think that's a beautiful segue that we were actually going to talk about a totally different subject. I mean, we were going to talk about, body image issues and disorder eating and gender, because those are all things that we're passionate about. But when we got together before recording, we were like, the world is heavy. We're exhausted. We're grieving. This is not fucking normal. And yet again, we're grieving the death of Chakta Youth Next Benedict, and it's just, this is so heavy on our hearts, as well as all the other ongoing things that are going on, witnessing multiple genocides and wars right now. And so we decided to actually just pivot and talk about what is happening in our trans, non-binary, gender expansive to spirit community, and to talk about the impact of this ongoing systemic violence and grief on our life as therapists and the lives of the clients we serve, who are often trans, non-binary, gender expansive to spirit themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in uh, on that note, I feel like it's important to also just state that the land that I'm on, while called Washington, while called Seattle, is unceded Duwamish, Coast Salish, Suquamish, and Stillaguamish land. And like you mentioned, this is not normal. I'm like, ugh. And yet it is.
Yeah,
It is
exactly.
normal.
Mm-hmm.
And it shouldn't be.
And absolutely. And I think that because colonization is so normalized, cisgenderism is so normalized,
Yes.
capitalism is so normalized, we're all trying to go through the motions. And I don't know about you, but, and I live on Dakota and Anishinaabe territories, currently known as Minnesota. But right now, everybody I'm talking to, they're exhausted, their heart is heavy, they're really just hanging on by a thread, but we're all like pushing through,
Yeah.
as if things were normal, but they're
Yes.
not. And so I'm wondering how that is showing up in your own life, in the life of your clients, if you are finding similar things where you are.
Yeah, it's a I say interesting a lot as to not like
That's
put
okay.
judgment on stuff. It's interesting. And I think there's that, that curse is may you live in interesting times and oof. Um and I go back to this idea of it's not that right now is we're dealing with more suffering than in like past history, but the
Absolutely.
fact that we are so connected, we're dealing with this, um, the way that we're getting our information is so destabilizing to our nervous system, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah.
Um, that is not for humans, it's not normal. And so what I am seeing is a combination of people who have skin in the game, um, not being able to separate from what's going on, right? And people who don't. I mean, this is the same old story. People who don't have the option of looking away, um, to do more caretaking of themselves, because that is also necessary. But for those who are living in that consistent state of this is affecting my experience, can't. And so I straddle this. I think about this a lot of with my various identities. I can't step away from my identity, my trans identity, but I'm white. So I can like potentially easily step away when I need to take care of my nervous system because I am white. And I like acknowledging the fact that that is a privilege to be able to do that. I can't with being trans, being also what is labeled as neurodivergent, but I don't believe in neurotypicality at all. But that experience, I can't step away from that. And so this shows up in my own personal work and work with clients who have shared but also different identities, of recognizing that when we need to be able to find moments of safety for our nervous system to be able to keep going, and if you're dealing with that continuous stress and emotional vigilance, it's more of a active, I have to find ways to do this and create a sense of safety, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're not with somebody with the living with the skin in the game thing, it is easier to be like, well, I'm just not going to look at the news for a bit,
Yeah.
right? It's easier to just, well, I'm just going to go take a walk and it's going to be fine. But if you're in the state of like, this is actively affecting my day to day, it's more a matter of like, okay, I have to consciously set it aside to find
Mm-hmm.
some joy, to find some sense of peace. Um, so that's what I see showing up a lot for me and for people that I'm working with. But it's just uh, different experiences depending on the identities that are shared and the recognition that there's a lot of privilege in the ability to not have to like put a lot of effort into trying to create that sense of safety. Does that make sense?
That makes so much sense to me, because I'm even thinking about, some of the things I've seen about like it's okay to rest, but rest is not retreating, right? And so when
Yes.
I'm thinking about what you were talking about, I'm thinking about, like how, yeah, similarly, I really have to make the different intersections around power and privilege. And I need to make that conscious effort to, no, I need to rest. I need to sleep. I also need to move this grief in some way to show up, right, for my clients. And resting is not retreating, it's not switching off, right? And even when I'm resting, I can't completely take this out of the equation, right? And I see it even thinking about, Next and Nexus family and community. They've really been on my heart, and witnessing on social media also a lot of Indigenous folks, for example, saying, hey, Nexus, like Indigenous belonging and identity as a member of the Choctaw Nation, is like being erased, right? Or it's being weaponized. So kind of just lift up, trans issues sometimes by organizations who haven't really put in the time to build relationship with Indigenous communities and who still come from a very colonizing kind of perspective or benefit, from the ongoing settler colonial project. And so that is complex because then I see my, trans non-binary gender expansive to spirit Indigenous siblings. It's almost like this, double whammy of like, this is just more Indigenous folks, suffering in schools that already have a horrendous legacy of systemic violence against Indigenous folks. And this is not just a trans issue. This is the ongoing legacy of
Yes.
colonialism. This is the ongoing legacy of our folks, getting killed and murdered or just worn down, but like
Mm-hmm.
systemic violence over and over. I don't know if that's what some of the things you were thinking about as well, or.
Oh yes. Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And it, like I feel like saying this, like, and
Mm-hmm.
on their land.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
This is not European soil.
No.
This is
Mm-hmm.
not the descendant of European soil. This is, and I have zero Indigenous American ties
Mm-hmm.
at all when it comes to ancestry. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and, it's, there was something I was going to say, but of course, oh yes, yeah. Something that maybe some of those who are listening are aware of, but doing, and I'm just going to comment on the fact that ASECT itself, it's not, there's no perfection there. I have had my own thoughts and feelings around whether or not continue to be part of ASECT. But in going through the ASECT process of becoming a certified sex therapist, we have to go through the thing called a SAR, which is a
Mm-hmm. Sexual
sexual
attribute
attitude reassessment. Is that what
reassessment
the
seminar.
reassessment?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it was such a, I was lucky to take it from somebody who was black, and to not get it from a framing from a white person. And one of the things that I loved, the when I get to learn things that weren't part of my academic training, because none of this is part of the
Mm-hmm.
academic training overall, like
Absolutely.
it's not a focus. You have to kind of like go out and find it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If it's important to you, you find it, you can. Um, was the very idea that the term transgender is a um, Eurocentric, like
Yep.
colonizer term, and
Yep.
so people from all over the world who are not part of that culture, that's not a term that is necessarily even connected, because it's a
Mm-hmm.
colonizer term.
Yep.
So for trans people who are labeling two-spirit folks or gender expansive, depending on, or not even gender
Yeah.
expansive, just like living lives, part of culture, and then say, oh, but you're trans. And I'm not saying, like, I honestly don't know
Mm-hmm.
that much about Nexa's background,
Mm-hmm.
other than the things that I have paid attention to. I do know that they're part of the Choctaw Nation, and I do know, preferred,
Mm-hmm.
I don't, not preferred, but pronouns, name,
I mean,
you
they
know.
had two pronouns, they and he, and it sounds like
Yes.
they did prefer he. That's what I'm hearing. Because also, even with pronouns, I'm like, some of us have more than one pronoun. So,
Yes.
I mean, all pronouns, like,
Yeah.
yes,
Well, you
these
saw
are
I
my
corrected
pronouns if you only have one. But if you have more than one, you might have a
yeah.
preference. Yeah.
Well, and that's the funny, like, that's the thing. I bring that up all
Yeah.
the time, and I
Yeah.
corrected myself here because I'm in a place that's being recorded, and I recognize how
Mm-hmm.
often I get corrected when I say my preferred
Yeah.
pronouns.
Mm-hmm.
And so I corrected myself because I didn't want to get that. But I
Yeah.
have preferred pronouns depending on where I am for
Yeah.
safety.
Yeah.
My preferred pronouns overall are they them. But you know what?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in family that's supportive. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I have chosen to not put energy towards that in
Mm-hmm.
my own family, because I just don't have the energy to deal with it. And so I ask my friends not to correct my family.
And I think that's a great example of like our lives are complex. And even when we talk about, next and next stuff, it is complex. And I've seen a lot of commentary on social media, even because when the video came out, which I chose not to repost because also I'm trying to be really mindful about
Yeah.
how much the trauma of minoritized communities is kind of used as trauma porn, really, our pain replayed over and over and over. And I really
Yes.
thought, is this footage that I need to share? And if I share it, why and what's my intention? What is it for? And who is it for and
Hmm.
why, right? But I've seen so much social media commentary about this is right or this is wrong, or you only use this pronoun to make life easier for his family, which I'm like, yeah, we live complex lives. And also sometimes there is a relational dance, and I'm not going to be there and judge it when I don't know all the details and all the ins and outs. And I think that's part, that needs to be part of the conversation, because I think we all want because of white supremacy, I think,
Hmm.
and colonialism and capitalism, some kind of neatly packageable kind of answers to this really big questions. But the reality is that We live complex, multi-issue lives, and we need to be able to talk about our complex, multi-issue lives in ways that are more nuanced. And I think that a lot of, I don't know about you, but I know that I feel like a lot of folks sometimes do want to make it into this is a trans issue or this is, I'm like, no, this is a complex issue of the ongoing legacy of colonialism, the ongoing legacy of white supremacy. And we need to be able to talk about all of those things. I can't separate, even the way we conceptualize gender and sexuality is a very Western colonial way of conceptualizing gender and sexuality that doesn't fit
Yes.
neatly in other cultures, and absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Definitely, I'm curious about your thoughts around. I mean, I watched the video as well, and
Mm-hmm.
I did not share it because of even the. And if you know, for those who are not familiar, it's the video. I'm assuming is the one where the being where he is being interviewed by the police.
Yeah, with
Yeah,
this mom present in the hospital. Mm-hmm.
but that alone, right there, being
Yeah,
interviewed by a police officer, that is that alone is traumatizing. I'm not sure if
yeah,
you've ever gone through that, but that is
yeah,
traumatizing, and so that can like the looking at things from a harm reduction.
yeah.
Um, I'm not saying that that shouldn't be shared, but it shouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
shared necessarily widely
Mm-hmm.
by everybody without any like some context of like this is what you're going to be seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, consent around that because other people um, who have gone through the process, and especially those who are already targeted by police.
Mm-hmm.
That can be a traumatizing thing to witness and to go through. Um, but yeah, I think I just went on a train of thought.
That's okay. We can go on many side
Yeah.
quests. We're both neurospicy, so we'll probably go
Yes.
on some side quests today. But I have so many thoughts crowding in my brain too right now and different directions that we can go to. But I think for me, it's like I'm always, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, I feel like there is almost this kind of belief that it's often coming from maybe folks with more historical privilege. They're
Hmm.
like, oh, this is so horrendous. If I share this, people will wake up because maybe this woke me up, right?
Yes.
But I truly don't believe there is any amount of trauma or violence that we can show people that will be enough to unsettle those systems, right? Right before jumping on the recording, we were talking about how there's so much rhetoric, for example, around protecting, women and children.
Hmm.
But like, which children are we protecting?
Yep.
Because we're obviously historically not protecting
Hmm.
Indigenous children. We're not protecting Black and Brown children. In fact, I would say that for Indigenous Black and Brown children, there's almost an impossibility of being children under colonialism and white supremacy, right?
Hmm.
We're not protecting trans kids. We're not protecting disabled kids. So when we're talking about children, really, are we just talking about cisgender, white, able bodied, moderately affluent children?
Hmm.
Because actually, if we were talking about all children, we wouldn't be grieving yet another Indigenous youth,
Yes.
dying. Like, does
Yes.
that make sense? And I don't know if you have any additional thoughts there. Yeah.
I mean, and that's part of like I have additional thoughts, and specifically in the way the interview went, the recorded interview went with the
Yes.
police officer was the way that Next was interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
Was look again, it is looking for a reason why three cis girls
Mm-hmm.
would attack him, right, in a bathroom,
Mm-hmm.
and they were looking. It seems to me like the police officer was looking for that like
Mm-hmm.
well, water. Okay. Oh well, that must be it then. If you poured water on somebody, then that invites. Um, I'm trying not to bring up another story, but this
Yeah.
idea of if you're protecting I'll state it.
Yeah.
If you're protecting yourself from being bullied,
Mm-hmm.
and you've been consistently bullied for who you are, and you do anything to protect yourself,
Yeah.
right? And then that is seen as, well, you're clearly the instigator. And
Yeah.
any amount of violence um, is okay.
Yeah.
And
But only if the person who's being bullied is minoritized.
yes,
Because if a dominant identity person protects themselves, then it's
yeah,
self-defense, right? And we see this play out over and over. But if
right.
it's
We
a
have to
minoritized person, it's
protect
our
white women
fault.
in bathrooms. White women and children in bathrooms must be protected at all costs, right?
Exactly. And here's the cost, right? The cost
Yeah.
is like a dad, Choctaw youth who
Yes. A
was
child.
a child who was
A
being
child.
harassed also and not protected
Yes.
by adults,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
In school. Yeah.
And not only that, but punished.
Yes.
Um, he was suspended before he died
Yeah.
for what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen it. I feel very fortunate to be living in so-called Minnesota that is a trans
Hmm.
refuge state. And I've seen trans and queer
Oh,
youth being harassed by not just their peers, but by adults, or being punished for protecting themselves from the
yeah.
bullying and harassment of their peers by adults. And this is like constant. And at which point do we start saying, hey, what is going on? It's not normal,
Hmm.
talking about it's not normal for adults to like harass like trans youth, and children. It's not normal for adults to not protect children that are in their care during
Yes.
school time, right? But instead, we're trying to find reasons to keep upholding the same systems. Because if we
Yes.
say it's not normal, then we really have to question, hang on a minute, what are we doing?
Yes.
As a culture and society. So it's much easier to put it on the individual. Oh, he must have been doing something to provoke those
Hmm.
girls, right? Must be his fault, right? Rather than like, oh, it makes sense that with this increased anti-trans sentiment and all the um, rhetoric that's being spewed online and on social media and on TV, that those other children, because they're also children that should be protected from this rhetoric, have internalized that it's okay to kind of abuse and be violent towards certain body
Yeah.
minds. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And on that, I have like two thoughts to
Mm-hmm.
share there, because I'm also in a state that is seen as a trans refuge state.
Yeah.
That is also has a indigenous population, and reservations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and to you step outside the bubble of the larger cities, and it's not safe for anyone who doesn't align with a colonized idea of gender.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sums that up, I think, hopefully. It's not safe, even though there's more gender neutral bathrooms, because there's only
Yeah.
one at service stations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like the safety is so, um, safety for whom, number one,
Yeah.
and then also the safety is I feel like it's over um, estimated. Is that, I'm not sure if that's
Absolutely.
the exact word that
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, but I, like, as a person who identifies as agender, I don't feel safe advertising that in Seattle everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's one thing, and the other thing that I wanted to add to what you just said, um, I wonder, and I feel like I'm also missing. There's something else I was going to say, and I think about things of like empathy comes up a lot. The idea of empathy,
Mm-hmm.
and especially being somebody who has been given the also colonized idea of being autistic, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is the idea of neurodivergence and neurotypicality is a very colonizer. It's a
Mm-hmm.
Western psychological, which the whole field is is
Yeah.
is fraught, and that's one of the reasons I'm starting my podcast, is to talk about the
Mm-hmm.
fraughtness of the idea of normal.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but the idea of empathy, it's really like tricky
Hmm.
because people can't truly experience empathy unless they are connecting it to something in their own experience.
Yes.
That's what empathy is. It's not actually feeling what the other person is feeling, because we
Hmm.
can't do that, but it's
Yes.
connecting with something in your own experience that
Hmm.
brings that up. And so, I want to, like, in this particular experience of what Next went through, um, if I'm not sure I can connect with like white cis men on this, but if white cis women can connect with how it feels to be interrogated after speaking about a sexual assault,
Hmm.
and the feeling of it being blamed for it for any reason, it's the same kind of experience that
Hmm.
um, that next. I mean, I can't speak exactly because wasn't able to,
Yeah.
but I suspect there's a similar experience of
Hmm.
anybody who is, again, being questioned and
Hmm.
needing to prove that they were harmed
Hmm.
first, right?
Exactly.
And that
Hmm.
they didn't do something to instigate that harm.
Yeah.
Um, Even if the harm that was like, when the harm comes back, that's even worse than the thing that you did. And why is that?
Yeah.
You know? Um, but it's just checking for anybody who happens to be listening who is kind of on the fence about that, which I suspect
Yeah.
anybody who's listening to anything that we're putting out is not on the fence. But like checking in with like how would that feel
Hmm.
to be questioned of your experience when you are significantly harmed, to be, blamed for it.
Yeah. And what would it feel like to be questioned and blamed for something that is so systemic, right?
Yes.
Something that you're experiencing every day. Just
Yes.
as if if you're a woman in this world, you're going to experience or read as a woman in any way, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
experience a lot of misogyny,
Mm-hmm.
because yes, again, complicated, nuanced topics, right? And then that's the everyday, and then in this moment of acute crisis, right? And again, I can only imagine, but can never understand what Nex's experience as a
No.
Choctaw youth is in terms of what he experienced every day in that school, day in, day out, and not just from peers, but from the adults around him, and I
Yes.
think that is so. I was thinking about how we're getting close to Trans Day of Visibility, which I believe is March 31st every year. And I was really thinking about this double edged sword of visibility,
Mm-hmm.
and how I've really, in my own lifetime, I've seen, the visibility of our trans, non binary, gender expansive, two spirit community really increase, but also how there is like that increased visibility can also bring increased hate,
Yeah.
increased pushback, increased violence, right? And I'm like, I think I'm gonna have so many feelings this year
Yes.
when cis allies are gonna post about, celebrating trans people or Trans Day of Visibility, or and I'm like, yes, and where are you when
Mm-hmm.
our young people need to be protected, or when somebody is picking on somebody from their gender, or when you're like talking to your own peers and children about gender and reinforce kind of cisgenderist colonial ideas of gender, right? It's just, it
Yeah.
seems easy to be like, let's celebrate visibility for trans people one day a week, but then let's keep reinforcing the ongoing Sala colonial state, where we are, every day, and let's keep reinforcing cisgenderism every day. And does that make sense? I almost feel like I have
Yeah.
such a difficult relationship with visibility at the moment, and the idea of
Yeah.
visibility management, and just what, as it's not bringing us increased safety, it's not bringing us increased rights in many ways. And and I say that as somebody who chooses to be very visible as a trans person, so there's also a paradox, right? I
Mm-hmm.
do see some benefits to that visibility, but I also think about who is paying the cost of that visibility. And it's not going to be me with a higher level of privilege,
Right.
right? Does that make
Right.
sense? I don't know
Oh, it
if you
makes total
resonate with
sense.
any of that.
Oh,
Hmm.
definitely. I mean, I have right now X on my driver's license,
Yeah.
and my family is in, and most of my family is in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of decided, well, I'm not going to go to Texas anymore. But my father turns 80 in April, and my family has invited me to come and, see my father. And seeing where everything is going right now in this country, and it's never been safe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I am thinking of going and changing my driver's license back to F, for my safety, because me showing my driver's license to TSA or to a police officer,
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't feel is making uh, anybody safer, right? That is already, again, colonizer experience of even having these
Yeah.
checkpoints and these things. Um, I think we do need licenses to drive
Mm-hmm.
vehicles, but you need training, or at least training, right? Um, but there's so much to say about that. But something you touched on, I think, is so important, has been in my mind, with a lot of things recently, is that idea of a bottom up approach to
Mm-hmm.
trauma, right? And to, I think, a lot of things. And this is not a Western psychological
Mm-hmm.
perspective at all. This comes from indigenous wisdom.
Yeah.
Um, we won't even touch on Maslow and where he got his ideas, because that did not
Yeah.
come from Europe, by the
No.
way. Um, Blackfoot, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
He was visiting and I may be incorrect with terminology because it was in what is now called Canada. I
Mm-hmm.
think that was the story. In any event, the bottom up approach I'm thinking of is, for us, like, we can't look at this as like white allies, or not white
Yeah.
allies, cis allies, um, saying, and this is going to, but this is, I say, this also works for white people, right? This is going to
Yeah.
work in any kind of marginalized experience. But the allies saying, well, cognitively, we just have to say you're safe and we just have to talk about it.
Exactly.
No, we have to
Mm-hmm.
create the safety for it to be safe for people who are marginalized to be visible.
Mm-hmm.
We need a bottom up approach, and we don't have that right now. And that's why it's so troubling to see so many laws, especially aimed at youth.
Yeah. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Um, because youth are a very marginalized demographic. They are
Yeah.
seen as property of their
Yeah.
parents. They're seen as not having any kind of actual agency.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's okay to tickle your kids, right? Um, that's terrifying.
Yeah. Not without consent.
Not without
Mm-hmm.
consent, exactly.
Yep.
So, and then we have the intersectional identity of, not only are you a youth,
Mm-hmm.
but you are, in a marginalized, you've been racialized.
Yeah.
And you have the generational trauma that is continued. It didn't end,
Mm-hmm.
it continued. And you're experiencing not only the generational trauma, but in your own life, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
compounded. And then we have uh, politicians making laws that making it unsafe to exist in the land, in the land where you're living. And for those who cannot go to refuge states,
Mm-hmm.
they're just completely left out. And
Yeah.
the said it again, but it's mostly, anyway, white.
It's both.
It's white, yeah, cis white. It's basically like, well, get to a state where you can.
Well, and that's such also a colonial mindset.
Yes,
Because sure, uproot yourself, your family
right.
from your community. I
Yep.
think for me, when people say that, and I say that as an immigrant who is like, part of the Italian diaspora and been, like has chosen displacement because of my own
I
transgender
left Texas
identities
for
too,
reasons.
as well
Yeah.
as economics, right? And so
Yeah.
it's like, and so I say that with all of that in the background, but even saying like, yeah, just uproot your family and, from everything they've known and your relationship and your community and go somewhere else as if those relationships don't matter. Right. And so
I mean, that's
that
what
is so
actually
hard.
safety is.
Hmm.
Community should be
Exactly.
safety,
Yeah.
but we need to create the safety in the community. But, like, I mean, it is so, it just so, it's just, empire, settler colonialism, um, whiteness, and I say that for anybody who is listening who is not aware of this. It's not saying that people who have been labeled as white are sick. The
Yeah,
idea of whiteness is sick.
exactly. Hmm.
The idea of race is sick.
Yeah, because it's rooted in anti-blackness, it's rooted in
Yes.
anti-indigeneity, it's rooted in all of those things we've been talking about. And I feel this conversation could go on for a long time, and I want to be respectful of your time because I know you've got clients, and I'm like, just kind of fitting in busy schedules as therapists. But I feel like I could have this conversation for a long time. I love the idea that we started from It's Not Fucking Normal, which is going to be your podcast. And I know this episode is going to be available both on Gender Stories and your podcast platform when it's out. But maybe to kind of conclude our conversation, like we started by saying we were going to talk about something else, but we had to be real about what is present and true for us right now. How are you taking care of yourself so that you can show up for your clients who are also, right, immersed in this moment? So where are you finding some rest and restoration so that you can keep re-engaging in the work that we do every day?
The thing that's most helpful for me is I take um, daily walks outside with my dog, and I have a friend who is a couple of doors down from me who is also a therapist. She's a psychologist and she works with kiddos. Um, and we talk about things in the evening. We kind of talk about what's been going on for us. And that has been the most beneficial, getting out into nature, connecting with nature, connecting with friends, connecting with community. And my dog, those are the things that have been most helpful for me,
That
which
is beautiful.
not shocking. Of course, that's
Hmm.
what helps, but that is what I'm doing. I'm curious also for you, what are you doing to help with self, like the term self-care is such
Yeah,
a loaded term, but
co-opted. Hmm.
how are you nurturing yourself and taking care of yourself during like this particularly interesting time?
Absolutely. Making sure that I do the basics like sleeping, drinking water,
Hmm.
eating, which I know seems, but if I don't do that, then I'm not going to be able to show up, but very similar in terms of connecting with like nature, connecting with my family and community, my lovely animal companions, and I love that whenever I talk to people, that is what holds us.
Hmm.
Relationships, it's the web of
Yes.
relationships that holds us, which again, zero surprise that we were always meant to be kind of in relationship. And so of course, relationship with nature, relationship with self, relationship with each other, that's where we find our rest and restoration, right? We're an
Yeah.
interdependent species. But unfortunately, yeah, colonialism, white supremacy kind of really dehumanize us in this way. And part of dehumanization is taking us away from those relationships. Mhm.
Well, I am just so grateful that even though I have a fraught relationship with technology and a fraught relationship with ASECT, I am very grateful that both of those have brought me in connection with you.
Oh, thank you. And likewise. And for those of you who are listening who don't know what ASEC actually is, it's the American Association for Sex Educator Counselors and Therapists, which is how Marissa and I first kind of connected. And of course, through technology because of distance. Well, I
Yes.
know that you have to go, but I always ask all the guests, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you are open to talk about? And I know we'll probably do another episode on the original topic we were going to talk about, but is there anything else that you wanted to mention for today?
I think I want to mention that as a final note that it's so important to help support youth to feel safe to be who they truly are, um, because that is what helps create healthy, connected adults. That's
Ah, I love that.
and so I don't work with many youth. I'm more focused on adults in the work that I do, but I work with a lot of adults who are not supported as youth. And it's an unpacking and a lot of trauma work. And so I am so invested in making sure that the importance of protecting marginalized youth um, continues to be like spoken about, and we need to do better. And we need to pay attention to other states um, uh, and do better.
Yeah. And we need to remember that like all young people are our legacy as a species, as a community, right? For me, being brought up in a more collectivistic culture where all the children are our children of the community. And so for
Yes.
me, I think what hits hard is like we need to look at next and we need to look at all those children and think they are our children, because as
Yes.
long as they think that, and while also recognizing the differences, right, and the different legacies. But if we start to think of all the trans, non-binary, gender expansive, two-spirit youth as our children, the indigenous, missing and murdered kind of young women and young two-spirit folks, they're our children, right? The young murdered black and brown kids, they're our kids. That we need to come back to our humanity. I really feel that very deeply right now. And
Yeah.
right now I feel sometimes we're so far from our humanity. Yeah.
A topic for another podcast.
Yeah.
To be continued.
To be continued. Dear listeners, thank you for being here. I know this was not an uplifting episode, and our hearts are heavy, and sometimes it's okay to be with the heaviness. But I hope that you feel a little bit less alone and that we can at least connect in our grief. And thank you for listening, for being here, and for showing up in your communities and in your relationship as best as you can. Until next time.